Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Everybody take their seats, please. I'm Patrick Sly, Executive Vice President of Emerson and a member of the 9 Network of Public Media Board of Directors. And on behalf of Jack Galmish, who couldn't be here today, our President and CEO of the 9 Network, it gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to this year's Saigh Symposium. Over the last 60 years, 9 Network has continued to broaden our customary role as a high-quality television program provider to an organization that is truly outwardly focused, listening to our community and bringing together the community to address key issues that impact our entire region. And now more than ever, there's a need for our community and our nation to work together to help our young people succeed. As many of you are aware, the 9 Network of Public Media serves as the executive producer of American Graduate, a national initiative to create awareness, understanding, and action around improving the lives of young people throughout our nation. It is through this work that public media has been able to transform the way we engage our communities. Complex social issues like the dropout crisis require all of us to think differently about the way we partner and how we do our work, and American Graduate has provided this opportunity to public media stations across America. As a result, communities are benefiting from the collective work of more than 1,000 cross-sector partners, and 60% of partner organizations reported that American Graduate is helping them achieve their outcomes. In a recent article of Washington Monthly, John Gompertz, President and CEO of America's Promise Alliance, expressed, "We need initiatives like Public Media's American Graduate to keep momentum behind our national conversation about graduation rates and to mobilize caring adults everywhere." As a trusted convener, public media is playing that role, and today's conversation is a great demonstration of what we can accomplish when we align our assets, resources, and passion toward the common outcome of improving youth outcomes. Our work here in St. Louis continues to be a model for the work of other public television stations and organizations across the country. And again, we're so proud that this work is really dedicated to helping young people become academically, socially, emotionally, and culturally prepared to be contributors to our community and to our country. It's an exciting journey that we're on together, and we're thrilled to have all of you joining us for this conversation this afternoon. I'd like to invite all of you to help me welcome a man who's been a great leader and steward of child well-being, my friend Dave Hilliard, President and CEO of Wyman. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. And thanks to the 9 Network for hosting us today and for all the wonderful work that's taking place in our community and around the country. Welcome all to the 6th annual Saigh Symposium. This annual conversation highlights issues related to youth well-being and to producing better outcomes for our people and our young people. And it's made possible by the Saigh Foundation to honor the life and legacy of Mr. Fred Saigh, who devoted his life to bettering St. Louis and left his estate to the perpetual benefit of young people in this region. If you're not familiar with the Saigh Foundation and with Fred Saigh, I invite you to go to their website and learn about the remarkable man and the great work that Saigh makes possible in this community. I bring you greetings from Mary Kemp and from Joanne Henya, who couldn't be here today. Joanne was taken slightly ill at lunch today, so she's on her way home to rest and recover to get back into the saddle and help us do our good work, but they asked me to extend greetings to you today. A contemporary leader here in St. Louis who's also building a powerful legacy for the well-being of our young people is our moderator today, Mr. Rich McClure. As all of you know, Rich is a co-chair of the Ferguson Commission. Some of you know he's the former CEO of Unigroup. And as a member of Civic Progress and its past president, was deeply involved in lots of different issues to improve the quality of life in our region. He also currently chairs the Regional Board of Teach for America, which is committed to addressing educational inequities here and around the country. He serves on the board of the United Way and the Boy Scout Council here in Greater St. Louis. Please help me welcome our moderator for the day, Mr. Rich McClure.
Thank you, Dave, and let me add my welcome and my thanks to the Saigh Foundation for this wonderful symposium. You are in for a treat this afternoon. We will have two very engaging keynote speakers, and we will then have a panel that will help us process what we're hearing. But that's not going to be all. You'll get to stay afterwards for a reception that's not just your normal reception. It's going to be a chance to, in a very unique way, continue the discussion. So look forward to that. You know, the Path to Powerful Partnerships is an ambitious title. And if you put the word partnerships and powerful together, it tells us an aspiration. And I think in our community, we know, and we have learned in many vivid ways over the past year, how the path toward sustainable, powerful, effective partnerships is so incredibly important. And it's essential for us, as we think about population-level outcomes for our youth, to consider carefully where we are and what we're doing and what we need to be doing differently, because expectations for our partnerships and the delivery of services that address some of the underlying root causes of the circumstances that we studied deeply with the Ferguson Commission are so incredibly important. Other studies and other efforts like the For the Sake of All study and the Ready by 21 Coalition have begun to, in very powerful and unique ways, put together the data and the information and the evidence that says we as a region must confront our reality. And that means that we have some uncomfortable truths that we have to face in confronting that reality. And addressing those truths means that we cannot deal in the silos of the past. It means that we cannot deal in half-hearted efforts. It means we have to deal in potent, powerful efforts that work, and that's our effort today, because we realize that we have a very significant performance gap in our region, a gap between our expectations and our need and the reality of what's occurring. And so that distance and closing that gap and the ability of these partnerships to deliver on the need to come closer together to achieving those expectations is important. And one of the most encouraging things to me is that in our region we have incredible capacity. And this significant capacity can be leveraged. And I think that's what we'll explore today, is how do you leverage capacity to build a path toward powerful partnerships. So for our time today, we're going to consider very carefully about why this is important, and we invite your engagement throughout the afternoon. I'm pleased to introduce the first of our two keynote speakers. Ms. Christina Holt is the Associate Director of the World Health Organization's Collaborating Center for Community Health and Development at the University of Kansas. She is fresh off the airplane, I just learned, from visits to Geneva and New York. In her work with the World Health Organization, St. Louis is right on the way, you know, to those particular communities. But she's here to help us start with an understanding of a much broader perspective on partnerships and how they can improve community life. We're delighted to have Ms. Holt here to present. And we're also excited that the World Health Organization Collaborating Center has made a commitment to longer-term support of the St. Louis region. So before Ms. Holt speaks, let's watch a short video that highlights one aspect of the World Health Organization Collaborative Center's work.
Good afternoon. It is such a deep honor to be with you all today. I direct a global resource called the Community Toolbox at the World Health Organization Collaborating Center for Community Health and Development at the University of Kansas. Our efforts focus on documentation of and building supports for helping people work together to bring about change and improvement in their communities. Several assumptions undergird our work. First, justice requires altering conditions that affect health and equity. This takes people working together in partnership across different sectors in the community to bring about progress. And there is a need for capacity among those with passion to make a difference. And calls for change must include supports for doing so. So what do we mean by partnership? For the purposes of today's conversation, we will define a community partnership as any multi-sector group of stakeholders working to improve population-level outcomes. So examples might include an association working at the neighborhood level to reduce crime, a team working regionally to improve graduation rates, or a partnership working on lead abatement at the community level. Participants often come from different sectors of the community, including faith, business, social service organizations, health, media, government, law enforcement, and education. These same multi-sector groups are often also called coalitions, alliances, councils, and of course, partnerships. So one of the primary objectives of our World Health Organization Collaborating Center is to expand the evidence base for collaborative action, people working in partnership to bring about improvement on community-determined issues and goals. For instance, we are a scientific partner in a national healthy communities study involving 120 communities, examining what intensity or dose of community change is related to improvements in rates of childhood obesity. In a different study, we recently collaborated with the World Health Organization Regional Office of Africa to examine what dose of community and system change was associated with bending the curve in Ebola response rates in 2 counties in Liberia. Our team's experience over the past 40 years shows us that whether near or far, the work of people taking action in communities to improve outcomes share many similarities. So what do these groups have in common? Well, the groups depicted here, such as Healthy People, which is working together to improve health outcomes for the nation, Charter for Compassion International, which is working to build a grassroots movement for compassionate communities globally, and the World Health Organization, which is working to make improvements on social determinants of health. These groups all have huge and lofty aspirations. And they also have the problem of needing to build capacity at scale to make a difference on these outcomes that matter. So you are not alone in your aspiration to take action to lessen the gap between how things are and how we aspire for them to be. Improving outcomes for all St. Louis youth, for all St. Louis residents. This is important work. And it is hard work. But the good news is that the capacities that are needed, these capacities are not unknown. Decades of work has been invested in distilling core competencies for what's needed for community work. Competencies include how to bring people together around issues that matter, how to assess what the community needs are, how to analyze the community problems in a deep way, how to come together to bring about change and improvement by creating strategic and action plans, how to build leadership, how to develop a successful intervention that's culturally and contextually appropriate, how to increase participation in community efforts, enhancing cultural competence, advocacy, policy development, grant writing, and evaluation and sustainability of these efforts. This screenshot is one page of the 7,000-page resource of the Community Toolbox, and this is illustrative in the kind of guidance that's available. This is a toolkit on developing strategic and action plans, and so it contains an outline for key activities involved with bringing a group together and working on a strategic and action plan with links into detailed how-to guidance. By clicking on the Examples tab, you can find examples of strategic plans that have been developed for different issues at different levels, in different contexts, including different cultural contexts and different levels of resources available. And the aim is really for these examples to help folks see how others have taken action. There's also a guidance available on common barriers in this work. The troubleshooting guides provide support in doing a situation assessment for common problems encountered in this kind of effort. For example, this offers guidance and reflection questions and links to more supports when considering how to face opposition and conflict. We're learning that there is broad demand for these types of resources for community improvement efforts. Last year alone, more than 5.8 million people visited the Community Toolbox from 230 countries. So what do these users tell us that they are looking for? They're looking for practical guidance. They have a goal, they have an issue they're wanting to work on, but they need a little bit of how-to information to make that happen. They're looking for some just-in-time resources, maybe for a meeting that they're going to be leading that following week. They're looking for resources for teaching and for training others. And they're wanting to learn from the work of other communities around the United States and around the globe. And of course, they're looking for inspiration and support for these efforts. Google Analytics, which we study carefully, help us better understand where users are coming from and what resources they seek. So while there certainly are nuances in the materials accessed by country and sometimes even by city, by and large, we find a lot of generalization across settings for the type of help communities seek. Our most popular resources include those on community assessment, determining what the community needs truly are and assets available for addressing those needs, strategic planning, coming together to create a shared vision that's large enough to bring people to the table, leadership and how to build local leadership for taking action, evaluation, and how to show contribution of efforts to improvement in outcomes. Community partnerships around the U.S. and around the world are working together to address wicked problems of our time. There are lessons to be learned from communities of people working together for improvement and hope to be gained in the many and diverse resources you have available here. Resources to create this meaningful change together. The work you envision, improving outcomes for all St. Louis youth and residents. This work is incredibly important and potentially daunting work, but it can be done. Learning to build local skills and talent and learning to collectively work together is essential to success. Our call, the urgent call of the hour, is to create wicked solutions to these problems worth solving. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, for putting us on the map, for helping us to understand a bit about the basics about building powerful partnerships. We're very grateful for the great work that you do at the World Health Organization Collaborating Center, and we're grateful for this overview to help set the stage. We're also ready for a detailed conversation about community partnerships and how they can improve community outcomes. And so I'm going to welcome to the podium Dr. Penny Foster-Fishman. Dr. Foster-Fishman is a professor in the Department of Psychology and a senior outreach fellow in the University Outreach and Engagement at Michigan State University, and we're pleased to have her with us today. She received her PhD in organizational and community psychology from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and her research interests primarily emphasize systems change, particularly how systems can improve to better meet the needs of children, youth, and families. This nationally recognized expertise in the connection between community partnership systems and change and youth outcomes makes her the ideal keynote speaker to carry our message on in this year's Saigh Symposium. Please help me welcome Dr. Penny Foster-Fishman.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored to be here to talk to you today about what it really takes to build a performing partnership, one that's really going to transform your community outcomes. And by performing, I actually don't mean that you need to worry about trying to do this. Okay, that's my daughter, by the way. But instead, you need to be thinking about what are those outcomes that matter in my community that I need to be achieving. And so what I want to share with you today is what we're learning from our work around the world and from the literature in the organizational change world and community change world about what it really takes for partnerships to be tremendously powerful. And as the speakers have already noted, there's an urgent call for action in your community as in others because of the kinds of outcomes that children and families are facing today. This is just the beginning of that list, but the list is long. So there's an urgent need to figure out if we're going to come together, how do we ensure that this work is really making a difference? And as Christina noted, what we're recognizing about problems just like this is that they're actually called wicked problems. And what we know about wicked problems is they create for us wicked opportunities. But don't be afraid, okay? What I'm going to share with you now is how can you be addressing a wicked problem. What we first have to understand is why up until now we haven't been effective. And that's because how all of you have been trained by people like me, university professors, to think about community problems. And how we've been trained to think about them is something like this. Tell me if you know this story in your community. We have lots of youth that aren't graduating from high school. And the reason is because, boy, they just don't have those academic skills. So we're going to provide a lot of mentoring and after-school programming to get them there and hope that they do that. Oh, and by the way, we might need another program, too, to help their parents know how to support their education at home. Okay? We might even layer a few more programs, and oh yeah, they're going to be evidence-based because we care about that, okay? But what we've discovered is that is never enough. And why is that? When we think about community problems like this, we are treating them as though they are simple. We can figure out the cause. The same cause is true for everybody in the community. And all we have to do is figure out one solution that will work and apply it, and we'll have success. Problems actually don't look like this. They look like this. We call this the orange box problem. And your challenge as a community and as a set of partners is to figure out what are those orange boxes that are working together to keep these poor outcomes in place. Because let me tell you, they're working together to keep the status quo as it is. And what we've discovered is that it is only those partnerships that understand that the problem is complex, it lives in a space like this, that real change starts to happen. Let me give you a story to sort of illustrate this for you. So, first let me sort of share with you, in your community, I was very impressed. You have this ecosystem map that's been developed by the Clark Fox Foundation. And for me, this is a great illustration of the kind of complexity that does exist. Here we have just the beginning of organizations that are focused on addressing child well-being. They span a ton of social issues. They're connected in different ways. And this is just the beginning of what it's like for a person who wants to try to promote child well-being. It's incredibly difficult because these organizations might have different rules, different policies for how they do their work, different ways of working, and they're operating in different places in the community. And what we often do is we take good programs, we plop it into a context that looks like this. And those programs fail, and what we do is we blame the child and the family for that failure. Let me tell you a story from my state of Michigan that will highlight this for you. In Michigan, we were very lucky in that our elected officials recognized that school readiness was an outcome that was a must for all children in our state. And that's something that was needed to help promote school readiness was to increase the access to state-funded pre-K slots. So several years ago, our governor passed legislation that increased funded pre-K slots by 16,000. okay? We got another about 16 the following year. But in the first year they launched 16,000, every county got additional slots. And everybody thought, yay, we're gonna have such a wait list. So many families are gonna wanna take advantage of those slots. What we discovered instead was that most communities were not able to fill those slots. In fact, most had only 50% of their slots filled. And what do you think happened? What do you think was the story in communities about this? Oh, those poor families, they're lazy. They don't care about their child. That's why they're not taking them to the pre-K system. We had the advantage to work in those communities to find out, well, what's really behind the fact that low-income families aren't taking advantage of this new resource, and this is what we learned. So there were some parents who didn't understand the value of education, but that's because nobody had taken the time to do outreach to help the people in the community understand that pre-K matters. Number two, most communities took those full-day pre-K slots, divided them in half to make them half-day options so they could save more children, but just think about what that must be like for a single mom who has a job and has multiple kids to take to multiple places. A half-day slot doesn't work for them. Pediatricians, who are the most trusted resource in most communities, weren't even told this was an option, so they didn't have an opportunity to refer, so most families didn't even know that this was something they could take advantage of. Head Start, also dealing with low-income families, had a long wait list in some communities of over 1,000 families that could qualify for these slots, but they didn't tell the state-funded pre-K program about it because they were worried they would lose their funding if they didn't have people on their wait list. There was no transportation. These slots were all over the county. Some of them would have taken 45 minutes to an hour for a family to get their child to that slot. And they never asked the parents what this and how this should be designed, okay? So this is a story that happens in America almost every day. And so our challenge is, if we want to make outcomes happen, we have to start to recognize the complexity of the work that we're dealing with so that the partnership efforts we're doing actually really matter. And what I want to share with you is what we're learning about what partnerships can start to do. And we've discovered in our research and watching sort of the good work of people like you and other communities is that there are 3 key things partnerships must do to be effective. Number 1, they have to be able to focus on the system. If you got to tackle those orange boxes, because that's where you're living, you have to see those orange boxes. Now, what I find interesting is most communities talk about those orange boxes all the time, but never in a partnership meeting. It happens at night when you're complaining to your friend about how awful work is. It happens in the parking lot after the meeting, okay? What we've discovered is if you bring those orange boxes into the partnership, and that's what the partnership is focusing on, you can transform communities. Number 2, gone are the days where we have the luxury to do a protracted strategic planning process. There is, in fact, the mantra out there, I'm sorry if I say this for people who might get a little nervous, that strategic planning and the idea of a plan in that way is dead. That there's a sense of urgency today, and we have to act with that sense of urgency, and that means as soon as you discover what's wrong, you have to start to design strategies to take action on that, and you have to make sure you're doing that effectively so you do no harm. And finally, long gone are the days when evaluators like me do an evaluation for you and give you your findings after you've spent your money, okay? What partnerships need is real-time data that's happening while they're doing their work so they can learn and improve in the process. So let's talk now about what's going to have to happen if you want to do these things, because what we've also recognized is that we've been trained to not operate like this. Okay, we're going to actually need a new set of habits if we want to sort of behave in this way. So let's explore what some of those habits might be. Okay, what I need everybody to do is to take a pen, and I believe my trusted assistant here has pens if you don't have it, and I need you to stand up and hold your pen above your head just like I am, okay? And if you've done this trick, don't tell others about it yet. What I want you to do is look at the bottom of your pen, and I want you to draw a large circle in the sky clockwise. Look at the bottom of your pen, draw a big circle that's clockwise, and now what I want you to do is to bring that pen down, keep twirling it, don't stop, and get it below your belt line and look at the top of your pen, and what do you see? Is there any difference in it? It's no longer clockwise. Did you see that? Okay. You don't believe me? Okay. Look at the look at the top, bottom of your pen, clockwise. Okay, you can all sit down. Okay. Okay. So that's not a trick. That is a lesson about the importance of perspective. This is a simple pen. All I did was spin it. But depending upon where I was positioned when I looked at it, that pen was doing something different. That is the challenge we face in communities every day. To me, it's analogous to those blind men walking down the jungle and running into that elephant. Depending upon what you touch, you draw a different conclusion. And so what we have to do in communities, we have to develop the habit of really paying attention to who are those critical perspectives we have to engage so we understand how that pen is really spinning. Now, some of you might be saying, oh, lady, I got this covered, okay? Because I've got lots of people around my table, lots and lots and lots. And I'm going to suggest that you might have a full table, but that doesn't mean you have the right perspectives, okay? In this kind of work, we need to be recognizing that depending upon where you're situated in society, what neighborhood you live in, what role you have, what your opportunities in life have been, you are going to see a different part of that problem space, okay? Just like you saw a different perspective on the pen, depending upon where you looked at it. It is incumbent upon us to pay attention to who is seeing that problem in a different way than I am. And if I don't understand their perspective, we will fail. There are lots of examples of this kind of failure happening, and often it's because we draw our boundaries way too narrowly. We only follow the list that's mandated by the funders. Here's 12 sectors you should have that come to the community that need to be at your table. Or we only bring the people that we know are fun and easy to work with, without strategically paying attention to who do we need to have to really understand this problem. How we draw that boundary around how we include has significant consequences for our work. Communities are filled with partnership efforts that have been misdesigned because we didn't ask the right questions about the context or include the right perspective, okay? And so what you want to do is make sure you're paying attention to who are those perspectives that you want to have. I'm going to give you the list that we've identified based upon our own work as well as the literature, and it is in the order of priority. Number one, your targeted constituents, the most forgotten group, but the most important to have their perspective. What are their needs? What are their desires? What is their perspective about the problem? Number two, the people in the trenches who are actually providing day-to-day work. I don't mean the leaders of the not-for-profit or public sector organizations. I mean the people providing the actual services. Number three, the natural support systems that exist in communities that are so critical to vulnerable families. Faith-based organizations, neighborhood leaders, informal leaders that know what it's like to live their lives because they hear about it on a regular basis. The decision makers, you guys, you can come too. Okay, funders, you're welcome as well as experts, okay? But note how important the constituents are as well as the supports in this process. And this is also critical. I'm not just talking about needs assessments. Many of you have engaged those individuals in needs assessment processes, okay? I'm talking about engaging them in understanding the problem, designing the solution, implementing the solution, as well as taking action and learning and improving. So the full phase of the work, all of those stakeholders and individuals should be engaged in every phase. Okay, I want to share with you one little story. It's actually Saginaw. In Michigan, we had the privilege of working there several years ago, and it was a community that was not in great shape. It was considered at that point in time the 5th most violent city in America per capita. High levels of pretty much every social issue you can imagine, okay? And for youth, awful outcomes. They were everywhere except where they should have been. They weren't at the home, and they weren't in school because they were in psychiatric hospitals, in foster care, and in the juvenile detention center. Those are costly outcomes for children, youth, and families, as well as for the system. The system was facing bankruptcy because they couldn't afford to continue to support that number of youth in these kinds of places. They called us and they said, please help us do anything you can. So we really wanted to go in and understand what were the perspectives on this kind of problem. We spoke to providers, okay? And we asked them, what's happening here and why aren't you able to get youth the supports they need when they need them so that you can avoid these kinds of outcomes? The providers said, oh, that's because parents and youth don't know what's going on, okay? And they don't really care, they don't really want to be involved. And by the way, we don't have enough programs, can you help us get more money for more programs? That's what we need, okay? What the youth told us was, well, I've gone to those programs and those providers don't treat me very well. Okay, so I don't really want to go back anymore. And by the way, what they're offering, I'm not interested in, so why would I go? The family said to us, well, those providers, they don't treat me very well, so that's why I stopped going. They blame me all the time. And do you know how long it takes to get into those programs and how many different forms I have to fill out? Okay, I don't have time for that. I don't get time off from my work to do that kind of stuff. And where the programs are placed are inconvenient for me. There's no bus route to downtown, so I can't even get to those programs. Okay. Now note, if all I had done was design my solution based upon the providers, I would have created a resource directory and added more programmatic slots. Does that sound familiar? Okay. It's by talking to everybody else that we can come up with a solution, and our solution addressed all of these issues. Okay. And we were able to engage everybody in acting solutions out. So the providers, their job, make that intake process better, okay? The youth, design what kind of after-school programs you want, okay? And help work with the Y to get that implemented. The families, develop guidelines to teach providers how to talk to you in an empowering way, okay? So the solutions, as well as the understanding of the problem, are dealt with both groups, all groups. Okay. You have your perspectives, you're engaging the right people now, you're really understanding what's going on. But how do you actually make this work about the system? Because that's what we really have to do. So remember, the system looks like this. And so we really need a framework for helping us go out into the community and ask questions to understand those orange boxes. We reviewed thousands of articles to identify a framework to help communities do just this kind of assessment. We call it our cloverleaf, okay? And in this kind of approach, what we're trying to help communities do is be able to achieve that targeted population level change by not just focusing on building collaborative capacity. When I work with lots of partnerships across America, what I find is that they spend an inordinate amount of time working on themselves. Okay, we need a shared vision, we need a shared set of goals, we need good member relationships, we need memorandums of understanding, we need agendas, we need communication processes. You're getting what I'm saying, right? Okay, here's the challenge. Note the gap between building all that capacity and actually getting to change. It doesn't happen. What we do know is that you can leverage that capacity and you can actually start to trigger something else, which is start to change those orange boxes. And what the research has shown us is that the more partnerships do that blue thing, they target those systems changes, the more partnerships are doing that, the more likely they are to move towards population level changes. And in fact, there's some research to show that the more and the faster you grow those kinds of systems changes, the faster and the bigger your population changes will happen. Okay, so we have to move beyond making partnerships about us and making it about the orange boxes and the changes in the community. And that's where our cloverleaf comes in, okay? This is the framework that we designed based upon the research about, well, if we're gonna understand those orange boxes, what do we have to be asking about? What are the critical questions? We need to be asking about things like mindsets. These are the attitudes, the values that drive people's behaviors. They're the most powerful predictor of what your system is going to do. So they're the attitudes the families have about you and whether or not they want to come and spend time in your organizations and your programs. They're the attitudes you have about them and how that influences how you interact with them. They're the attitudes you have about each other and whether or not you work together and refer. There are also the components. This is the programs you're offering, but it's not just the programs. It's where are they located? What time are they offered? Are they really accessible to the families and children and youth in our community? And are they really designed to meet the needs that we care about? We are often shocked to learn when we work with communities that they might have a lot of programs out there, but they're not aligned with the current needs that community is having. Connections. These are the referrals, the exchanges, the flow of information and people that happen in communities, the flow of data, the flow of learning, the flow of resources. When those connections work well, services are efficient, people don't fall through the cracks. When they don't work well, the system gets stagnant and people don't get their needs met. Regulations are the policies and the rules that guide our behavior. There's a misnomer that the most important policies that guide your lives are the state and the federal policies. There are actually a ton of policies that you are in charge of locally, within your organizations, within your city council, within your regional government, that influence day-to-day life in this community. And so the goal is to understand what are those rules and policies that we control, that if we just adjusted them, things would be a lot better and more aligned with our goals. Resources. Everybody wants more money, right? Of course, that's one critical resource. But actually what's more important are two other kinds of resources that matter in communities. One are the human resources. We often ask providers to do things we've not spent the time to train them to do effectively. So what are the knowledge and skills providers need to do the work? What are the knowledge and skills families need or youth need in order to carry out what we're asking and expecting of them? And then there's also the community resources. To what extent do you have the infrastructure in place in your community to support a good, safe life? Do you have a transportation infrastructure, job infrastructure, housing infrastructure, so that people can have their basic needs met? And finally, power. Who sits at your tables? Whose voice really matters? And who gets to decide what happens and how resources are spent? What we often find is there's a significant imbalance between what people look like who have needs and who actually has power and influence in the community. And the goal is to make that more aligned. So in our work, and what we're finding useful in communities and in the research, is that the more communities work to understand these conditions, and the more that they work to then align these conditions with their targeted goals and outcomes, the more successful they're going to be. And then, to make this your work, you put it on the agenda, okay? Your meetings should be influenced by what is on your agenda. If what is on your agenda is not the system, not the orange boxes, you're never going to tackle it. So what you learn from that assessment about your community conditions, you now turn into priorities for change, and that's what you start to talk about in whatever partnership meeting that you're in. The other thing we do is we look at and help communities use that information to create this sort of developmental trajectory of success over time. In your Ready for 21 report, there was a recommendation that this could be really useful here in your community to have a developmental trajectory of outcomes that showed success from 0 to 24. We find that also really helpful because it not only helps people to sort of know what are our North Stars that we're headed towards, but more importantly, you can map your programs against it. What are the programs we have? What is their reach? What is their quality? Are they aligned with the outcomes that we're trying to do? This is a fabulous step for communities and partnerships as they begin to try to identify how do we better meet the needs that we have in our community. Okay. So one of the challenges we face is that this work does feel overwhelming. And sometimes when you're in a partnership meeting, people might be saying things like, this is impossible. Oh, we've tried this before, it's never going to work. We're never going to overcome or address these outcomes. And it's true if you view the challenges like this. What we're realizing, though, is that if we don't view the challenges like this, but instead as something that we can begin to pick away at in small things, we can actually start to tip it over. There's a famous change consultant and scholar named Carl Weick out of the University of Michigan. And he uses the analogy of boiling a frog. And he says that change should happen just like you would boil a frog, slowly. If you put a frog in a pan of cold water and you turn that on low, it's not going to jump out. It's when you make the big leap in the temperature. And sometimes when you make a big leap in communities, that people start to show a lot of resistance to change. And so the challenge is how can you tackle that big boulder by instead engaging in lots of what are called small wins and incubating change all across the community so that you reach a tipping point. And what we're discovering is, again, the more of those small changes that you create, the more likelihood you are to transform those population level outcomes. So let me sort of describe what this is, and I'm going to give you some specific examples from Saginaw. So small wins for me are something I can do in 6 months. It's not going to have a big reaction to it, but it's going to be tackling those root causes, and it's going to actually lead to my bigger goals. So let me give you some concrete examples about what this could look like. In Saginaw, we had a huge high school dropout rate. When we were there in 2007, less than 55% of the kids graduated from high school, okay? So that was a significant problem, and we worked with the community to identify all the reasons why a set of kids might be dropping out. One of the big reasons why kids were dropping out was because when they were in the juvenile detention center, the way the center named their courses was not aligned with the way the public school named their courses. So when they went to go get credit for the classes they took while in the detention center, lo and behold, they didn't show up. And they lost their confidence, and they would drop out. And so we simply worked on, let's align those courses. That's a small win. In 2 months, we had an aligned set of course names. So Biology A is what it used to be called in the detention center, and Biology 101 in the high school. They now got called Biology 101, and lo and behold, the credits happened, and in fact, that led to the kids staying in the school. Simple solution to what looked like a pretty big problem. Let me give you another one. We had lots of youth that were being removed from their homes because they were not getting the mental health supports they needed. One of the big reasons they weren't getting the mental health supports is because the parents stopped trying to get a mental health provider. The Public Mental Health Authority had a 6-step intake process. Now imagine you're a parent who has a child that's socially, emotionally in need, and you have to go through 6 steps to get your child that mental health counselor, okay? What we asked the families was, how many steps could you do? They said 2. We think we could handle 2. 2 meetings, good. The Mental Health Authority, not a big deal, and just a couple of months shifted their intake process so well, in fact, down to 2 that they got flooded with clients, okay? And so again, a great example of a simple solution for what had been a problem in that county for a very long, protracted time. What we've discovered is by simply asking people the question, why is this a problem and what can be done about it in the next 6 months, you can trigger a ton of small wins that can address what initially looks like a very intractable problem. We also track these changes over time. So in Saginaw, in the first 6 months, they initiated 81 actions that transformed that system, okay? That's how quickly actions can happen. And in Saginaw, this was transformative because this was a county nobody would touch. They were headed towards bankruptcy. Nobody could get the outcomes to move. The partners didn't like each other. Nobody thought anything could happen. It was the focus on those orange boxes, so we weren't blaming each other. We were tackling commonly agreed upon systems issues, and we were doing it fast and quick that created tremendous momentum and movement on systems change in that community. So the other problem we have with partnerships is that we want our work to look like this. We got our plan, we know where we're going, this is how we're going to do it, but in reality, community work looks like this. Okay, and that strategic plan you wrote, it ain't going to help you deal with this. And it's confounded by the fact, by how we bring people together. And I'm going to be talking about that now and how problems like this you're going to watch me adapt quickly. So there we go, thank you. Okay, whoever did that. So we need to adapt quickly, okay? Partnerships are not designed to adapt quickly for 2 critical reasons. Problem number 1, we have lots of people often sitting around a table. What happens when you have too many people sitting around the table? You're talking, and they're not listening. They're doing everything else but listening, okay? And so what's emerging around the world is a recognition that we don't want too many people around the table. Instead, what we're going to do is create lots of tables, and we're going to organize people in a way where it's safe for them to have a conversation, okay? Now, I can even engage more people because I have more tables. But I have the tables small enough so that everybody is accountable and present in the room, okay? Number one. Number two, let me show you how this looks actually in how we did this in Saginaw. We had a leaders group. We had a group for people that did direct services. We had a group for families, and we had a group for youth. Each one of these groups met every month, and they all worked on the exact same agenda, but they tackled it from their perspective and what they had the scope of influence to target. Leaders, they focused on policies. Implementers focused on shifting the way work flowed. Families and youth provided lots of feedback on those things and also identified what they could do to make change happen in the community. Okay, so we need to shift our structure, but we also have to shift what we talk about. In many communities, what we've been told by our friends in the South is that what partnerships really are is what's called a sit and get, okay? I come, I sit, and I get a whole bunch of information. My feedback to them is that's called the internet, okay? If I'm coming and I'm spending face-to-face time with you, we should be focusing on something other than what you can send me via an email link or on the website, okay? And so we need to begin to move our meetings and agendas to be about action. And how do we do that? What we have found, again, is we simply ask people, what can you do about this? We make the environment about problem solving and real-time action and commitment. So that's what you think could be done. Who's going to do it? Let's get somebody's name down, and by when do you think you could have that occur? That's how we got 81 actions initiated within 6 months in Saginaw. The other thing that we do is we use an action learning facilitation process. Sort of like the plan, do, study, act model that lots of people use. We've used that same model, but we use terms that a systems person would use, like let's define what that problem is. Now that we know it because we've done a root cause analysis, let's design a solution that can be achieved in 6 months. Let's implement it. Hey, how's it going? Are you achieving what you need to do? And what did we learn from this? And what do we need to do differently the next time? So every meeting is using a process like this. And so they're no longer sit and gets, but instead spaces for real-time problem solving. So imagine that infrastructure now. And now you're the partner facilitator. What you're doing is you're helping every one of these groups use an agenda that targets systems change, that focuses on real-time problem solving using action learning, and you are weaving information across these groups. Because remember, we're part of the same system. So let me illustrate this for you very quickly. And this is a true story from Saginaw. So one of the changes that got initiated there was a shared consent form because information wasn't flowing across the organizations. I went to the leadership team meeting and I asked, how's the consent form going? And they said, oh, it's great. We're using it. Awesome. Later that day, I went to the direct service provider team. Note that they're from the very same organizations as the leaders, okay? How's that consent form going? What did they tell me? We didn't know we could use it. Okay, none of us have used it. We didn't even know we could. We take that feedback right back to the leaders, tell them people don't seem to be using it so well, and then they tell us the truth. Oh, we forgot to tell our lawyers to get approval for that, okay? So then we worked on making that happen. They now tell us, yep, we're all ready for it. We go back to the direct service providers. Hey, how's it working? Great, yeah, we got it. We're doing it. We said, okay, why don't we go check with your families that you're working with and see what they tell us. We go and check in with the families. How's the shared consent form going? What do the families tell us? What consent form, okay? This is what real-time community change is like, okay? We often fail because we don't do these accountability check-ins. You need an infrastructure that will provide you with real-time feedback to let you know if your work is working. What we find over and over again is the work is not working, and we need to be making real-time adjustments to make those shifts happen. So, let's just sort of wrap this up. If you want to have a partnership that can really transform outcomes, what do you need to do? You need to engage an expanded list of stakeholders, making sure you have the right perspectives engaged in all of the work. You need to make the system the focus of your work by assessing those system characteristics, thinking about root causes. You need to grow small wins, as many as you can, and you need to grow them quickly because it's the rate of growth that also matters. You need to make your time together not about information sharing, but instead about real-time problem-solving, action, and learning together. In all of that work, you need to be seeking equity. You need to be asking questions about whether or not these efforts are advantaging or disadvantaging anybody so that we have our sights on that equity. And most importantly, you have to start now. This is not meant to be a call to action to think and to design a plan, but instead to start to do stuff today. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny, for giving us a great deal to think about and a framework against which to measure ourselves. And thanks to both you and to Christina for giving us a tremendous amount to think about. In fact, to discuss these ideas and to help us consider their application now, we're going to bring to the stage a panel of 5 community leaders that I think you'll enjoy hearing from. I'm pleased to introduce our panel moderator, Francella Jackson. Ms. Jackson is the Director of Community Programs for the East St. Louis Police Department, as well as the Administrator for the City of Cahokia, Illinois. She also happens to be a certified conflict resolution instructor, so we'll see how the panel gets along, and then you may need to use those skills. Next, Mr. Alan Bird proudly serves as the Dean of Enrollment Services at the University of Missouri St. Louis. And under Mr. Bird's leadership, the University of Missouri St. Louis recently graduated their largest class in history, including a record number of African American students and Pell Grant recipients. He also finds time to serve as co-chair of St. Louis Graduates, a collaborative network of nonprofit K-12 education, higher ed, and philanthropic funders and businesses. Our next panelist is Ms. Vanessa Foster Cooksey, the Senior Vice President of Community Affairs for Wells Fargo Financial Advisors. She directs the St. Louis firm's nationwide strategy for charitable giving, for volunteerism, and community and civic involvement. Next, Ms. Kendra Kapanis serves as Executive Director of Maternal, Child Health, and Family Health Coalition. She oversees this health-related nonprofit organization's focus, which is on improving health outcomes, and it's so important the work that she does that she serves on the St. Louis Children's Hospital Child Health Advocacy and Outreach Advisory Board and the St. Louis Mayor's Commission on Children and Youth. And finally, Ms. Kathy Osborne is the Executive Director of the Regional Business Council here in St. Louis. Kathy serves on a variety of business and civic boards, including the Urban League of Greater St. Louis, the St. Louis County Economic Council, and the United Way of Greater St. Louis, the Airport Commission, and the St. Louis University Board of Trustees. So you can readily see that we have a very qualified group of community leaders to help us process and continue this wonderful conversation. Let's welcome them to the stage, and thank you, Francella, for moderating.
I don't know about you all, but I thought our speakers were great, and they shared a lot of valuable information that I know I can use in my community building. But I'd like to know what you think about those speakers and what they had to say. What are you doing to help with the work that we're talking about right now? And you can jump in at any time.
Okay. Well, personally, I was fascinated by the speakers. I mean, everything they spoke about really ties into the work that we do with St. Louis graduates. For those of you not familiar with our organization, we're a collaborative network of college access organizations, educators from K-12 and higher education, business leaders, philanthropists, and other influential people in the community who come together to really focus on improving educational attainment and degree attainment for low-income and first-generation students, which is very critical to our region. Through that, I mean, we've used a collaborative framework since our existence. It's really part of what we do. We bring people together from different sectors because we knew that's the only way we'll be able to create significant change. For the most part, it started with conversations in a coffee shop 7 years ago where our co-founders, Faith Sandler and Jane Donahue, spoke to countless people about what can we do to remove some of these barriers for first-generation low-income students in our community. And it led to us growing to a point to now where we have an influential network and we're implementing various things to remove barriers so college is more affordable, to make sure more high school graduates graduate, they're proficient, and they don't have to start in 2 years of developmental courses when they arrive in college. And we're working on things, various things that have been recognized, and now we're to a point where St. Louis has been invited to be part of the Community Partnership for Attainment Network through the Lumina Foundation, and we're one of 75 cities now that are working collaboratively to really advance degree attainment among adults. And recently we were selected, St. Louis was selected as the site for the next convening meeting. So we're very excited about that because it'll be an opportunity for us to share some of the services that we've implemented that have really had a positive impact on our community, and we want that to be able to replicate it in other cities like St. Louis.
So I'd like to hear from somebody else. What do you think about the speakers and how does that tie into what you're doing?
Sure, I would agree with Alan. This was very timely for us at the Maternal Child and Family Health Coalition. Well, we've been facilitating partnerships and collaborative efforts since 1999. We, in the last few years, have been digging into new literature, new research to help us build our capacity, build our practices, and how we can improve supporting collaborative efforts in our community. Being more intentional about who we're engaging. We have the fortune of working with a lot of, hundreds of individuals and building long-standing relationships with those who work in maternal, child, and family health. But we recognize there's so many other sectors and perspectives that we need at the table. And so we're being much more intentional about who we're engaging, and not just an open tent, anybody come, but it's still open, but really specifically reaching out and asking people with different perspectives, new perspectives, to be in the conversation and help us. So I really appreciated the comments today.
What about you?
Well, first off, I must say I'm an impatient person, and I have a propensity to action. So thank you, Dr. Penny, when you got down to that part, because then I was lighting up. And I thought it was fascinating on many levels. And obviously, when you take time to learn, to hear from people who are studying and research this, we're more in the field of action, less in the field of the study. I work with 100 different companies. We came together to act on high impact issues, and the whole reason we did that was because alone we could not accomplish as much as we could together. And we realized right away you needed to be educated. You needed to understand what the issues are and the complexity. So the complexity, we have seen it time and time again. But our tendency is more towards the action side. And I thought towards the end when they were discussing something about building collaborative capacity. It's sort of like in St. Louis, if you can do it, sort of do it, but sort of really do it. So like we're spending a lot of time building collaborative capacity. And I do like this kind of discussion about how big does the table get. We tend, frankly, I'm just going to be honest with you, to stay away from tables that are these massive, everybody convenes and everybody's sitting there. Because what we found is people come to those massive things, a few things go on, and really in their head, they're thinking about when do I get out of here to go back and do whatever I was doing before. So we have found much more success, and I will tell you just a more timely case is around the Ferguson crisis and some things that happened. And there was immediate things that needed to be addressed. And we put a fund together called Reinvest North County. What it ultimately became is a great learning tool because the crisis forced us to really get in and figure out what's really happening, particularly in this case for small businesses and for schools. What do they need? So it wasn't about us saying, here's what you need. It was really getting to know that. But that was an instance where action was needed fairly quickly. And what I found is it has built now this other collaborative capacity of what do we really need. And it's really complex. And how do we go about doing it? So we will tend to be more the people probably on action pieces of that. But we're also very, very aware these problems are complex. It takes a lot of people's perspective. Just another aside, you know, in working with a number of the superintendents, in the heart of that particular civil unrest, I was very shy, in a way, about asking them to meet with me because they were busy. They were just surviving, trying to get kids to school and deal with parents. And here's what I found. Nobody was meeting with them. And then when I got 4 of them together, and I thought, oh, time, and I'll meet someplace really convenient for you, and this, I was very skittish about it. Thank you for bringing us together, because we never talked to each other. And then it went on and on and on. And I think one of the things that really shocked me was when I realized we were doing fundamental education reform legislation at the state level. Nobody asked them. They didn't have a lobbyist. They don't have that capacity. They don't have grant writers. So there was so much they spoke about which was true. I mean, I hope for St. Louis that at some point we stop building collaborative capacity and start using that collaborative capacity in sort of maybe meaningful pods. Do you know what I'm saying? Of, okay, let's take this and then let's try to go forward. But outcomes and measurements. We just don't fund things that ultimately don't show in the data that it's moving something along.
I'd like to know what you thought about the speakers and what work are you doing, and is it working?
Absolutely. This has been phenomenal, and I've truly enjoyed the speakers. As Wells Fargo were one of the top corporate givers in the St. Louis community, and 2 strategies that we've employed is being very specific about how we will invest our dollars. This year we set a goal that we would invest 80% of our total contributions budget in the form of direct grants and 20% in the form of sponsorships. And what that does for us is give us the opportunity to help build the capacity of organizations through unrestricted grant funding and focus our efforts in a way that helps us to measure the impact of the programs that they're hosting. Another program that we have is called WFA Gives, and through that program we've touched over 250 nonprofits where we've invited them on our campus not only to tell our story but also to hear from them. And what we have found as a great benefit from the program is that we're connecting people. So I think that's the role that a funder plays in the community, is helping nonprofits and other organizations come together. Did you know so-and-so was working on that? Did you know such and such is working on that same mission? And oftentimes there's not that space when a funder is present where we're asking and requiring our partners to work together.
Well, and truthfully, at some point, we have to stop funding things that aren't effective.
That makes sense.
And I think that's a real obligation on the part of funders, because what can happen, we found in our first work in the St. Louis public school system, is that there was all kinds of programs and the kids were failing and everybody was unhappy. But there was lots of programs. So we had to kind of say to the superintendent and those that really had the expertise, what is it, where are you going and what do you need to get there? And then align those programs. And so that meant there had to be some discipline on funders' side to say, unfortunately, good program, but we're not going to fund that right now because we need more science or more literacy type programs. And that's hard to do because fundamentally we want to please people and we really want to help people. I don't think anybody's in this that doesn't really want, that doesn't care. I look at the pictures while the speakers were talking over here, and that's who we respond to. That's what we feel urgent about. I mean, and so, but funders have an obligation, and I think Wells Fargo, which you have done, Vanessa, we've known each other for a long time, but she really has taken that program and really brought it together to see what are the key things we can focus on because we want to do something different.
So that actually led me to the second question. Is it working and how can you improve it? So we've heard from Wells Fargo, we heard what you thought. I'd like to know what the others think about how can we improve upon what we're doing as far as building these capacity, these relationships and partnerships and things like that.
Well, one thing I'd like to add, which is this tension that you hear between action and building capacity. And how do we find ways to do that interconnected, intentionally, and doing that in a way that, so there's a saying, Peter Drucker, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if you don't take time to be intentional and build your culture, build your relationships and trust, you can't really be effective at getting the outcomes and the action as a collaborative partnership. And so there is a tension, and we face it all the time, of get to action. What have you done? What have you accomplished? And yet part of what you accomplish is building that foundation of the culture, the buy-in on a common problem understanding. Some of the work that you're talking about helps you build to that culture, and that is action. That is getting you towards some outcomes. And so I think recognizing what are some realistic expectations for the time that this work takes, as well as not losing the sense of urgency. So there's a real tension there in the work of building partnerships to balance, and it's something you have to keep adjusting as you go.
You know, let me speak to that for a second. When our St. Louis public school system has been on a 15-year trend from unaccredited to the points for accreditation. They have a long way to go. But part of what I had to do is break that down, because one of the things we love about United Way is you announce a campaign, you set a goal, you raise the money, and in 1 year you either raise it or you didn't raise it. And it goes for really good causes. With things like school reform, these are not things that are going to happen in a year. So part of my job was somehow break that down into pieces so you can see the incremental progress. Do you know what I'm saying? And it takes sometimes a patience that many funders don't have, but you got to be in there for the long haul. You can't really be serious about certain things, and probably the area you're in is a good example, if you're not going to be in the long haul. But I do believe that there is an accountability to sort of see progress along the way, and I would suspect you would agree too. On that.
But I also heard her talk a lot about expectations.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know, is what we're doing, are our expectations aligning with our community expectations, and how are we going to deliver that? And is there a gap? And if there's a gap, what does that gap look like between our expectations and what we're doing and what the community expects us to do?
I mean, there's definitely a gap there, but I feel like, I mean, we have potential in our community to really to remove some of the barriers and close the gap. I mean, for example, University of Missouri St. Louis, this past year we graduated our largest class in school history, and it was primarily because we had a huge increase in our African American students graduating and our Pell eligible students graduating. Part of that was driven by, but of course a lot of it was strategic. We had to look at a lot of things that were not working and make changes and reallocate funds. We had to do a lot of research to figure out what courses were barriers to students making persistence, financial barriers, and where we were going to take funds to close some of those gaps for some of the students, and also stronger community partnerships. I mean, we work closer now with all of our partner organizations, from College Bound, the College Summit, Wyman, Kaufman. All of these groups are at the table saying, we're sending kids to you, and we want to help you help these kids succeed. So we're finding ways to integrate that into our services and to be better prepared to not only serve students, but also to be able to report back to the community what we're doing, what's working, and what we still need help doing. So assessment is a big piece of it. In order for us to improve, we have to continue to look and see where the gaps are, what we can do to strategize to close the gaps, and if it's working. Because again, we spend a lot of money on programs that we were funding out of tradition just because we did it every single year. Well, we are not in a financial position to do that anymore.
And one of the things that I think is important that I was most attracted to in the presentation was the conversation around mindset. And my colleague Carolyn Roby likes to think about and talk about our work as patient capital. And it's not just money, but it's also people and being there for the long haul. And we have definitely several programs where Wells Fargo has done that. But I think that what patient capital does, both people and dollars, allows us to think more creatively, explore collaborations, apply critical thinking and inquiry, as well as celebrate those small wins. And if we can do that, one of the things I think happens along the way is we can reframe how we think about failure. Because I think that's what sometimes derails progress and limits our expectations is if we feel that something didn't work, then what do we do? So just rethinking that and shaping how we think about it is important.
So I think all of you are doing so many wonderful things, and I'm learning. I hadn't heard about your program. But how can we use those programs and different, I hate to say program, but lack of a better word, how can we use those to strengthen the outcomes that we're trying to achieve?
You know, one of the things I like about St. Louis graduates is it was started by two people who had no ego in this deal. They also, and they were very smart and capable. They kind of knew what they wanted to do, but first they had to study it. They had to get the data. And the money they needed all along has been really modest. So it wasn't one of these, give me $5 million and maybe I can figure out how to do this or the other. So not having ego investment, pulling people together in ways that you really couldn't say no, and being so thoughtful about it, and then having reasonable financial expectations, and then testing the model, and then testing it, and then all of a sudden now it's a much more what I would call significant kind of collaboration with other people and other pieces, and it's gotten more complex. But I will tell you, I don't think St. Louis Graduates would be where it is today had not the people that started it had that sort of, it's not about me doing it. You know, I don't want to be in there. And I think that's a lesson for everybody to learn. And for us, particularly working with nonprofit groups, we want to be very sensitive to the fact we're not on the line every day. I'm not a teacher in a classroom every day. And that is hard, hard work. So hearing and respecting people, which is I think what they did when they started St. Louis Graduates. They didn't run over universities and say, you're not doing your job, you're not getting enough kids through. Instead, they really were deliberate, patient, and it wasn't an ego thing for them. And look what happened to it.
So great. So can you tell me about what you're doing and how those outcomes can be achieved?
Sure. Well, the Maternal Child and Family Health Coalition is bringing individuals and organizations together to identify the priorities that our community sees as most important for improving maternal child health. And then groups form around those priorities and figure out how to take action, if that's through advocacy around policy change, if that's some best practice training or programs that we need resources to be identified and directed to that priority. So we do a number of things, and we have smaller sort of, I say we're a coalition of coalitions. We are not just one big table, but lots of pieces. A lot of it all focused around improving birth outcomes, infant mortality. And I think what we do is help by bringing all of the parts of the system together is better understand how all of the system is operating and where there are opportunities for improvement. Part of what's challenging from what we were hearing today is this focus on systems, and I don't think that's part of our all of our expertise and knowledge base, and so how do we build capacity? I think that's one of our areas of a gap in our performance, is really understanding how to see the whole system, define the problems, and how to affect change in the system. And I would say that's probably one of the biggest areas that we could work on in St. Louis. Though I do want to reflect on, historically, this community has come very far in its capacity to work together. When I started at the coalition 11 years ago, I was sat down for lunch with one of the founders who said, "You're very brave to leave your job and come work at this coalition." There was a sense of expectation that it would fail. And there's a sense of the self-perception that we have in St. Louis that we don't do this very well. And yet, example after example, we see St. Louis Graduates, we see Regional Health Commission, Behavioral Health Network, 24/1, lots of opportunities in St. Louis where we are collaborating, building partnerships, and getting improvements. In 24/1, they've seen a remarkable reduction in infant mortality. Not specifically driving at infant mortality, but because they've brought all of those pieces together to work on improving the community as a whole, they're seeing tremendous improvement there. So that's not our work, that's their work, but I think we should recognize that our region has a lot of capacity in building partnerships and collaborating.
And one thing about it, we know that it's a tough job.
It is tough.
In the Metro East, we've been working with East Side and Line trying to build those partnerships. And there are some things that sometimes unintentionally undermines what we're doing. So I'd like to have a conversation about that, and how can we overcome those things? Anybody can jump in.
Well, I think it all starts with having that common goal and being able to put our individual agendas aside. Because when it comes, especially when it comes to student success, oftentimes we like to play the blame game. The universities, we blame it on the high schools. The high schools blame it on the middle schools. But we have to take a step back and say, what can we do at our level to improve the situation for the students? So that was a big challenge that we had at my university. We had to stop focusing on what was wrong with the students as opposed to these students are paying tuition on our campus. What can we do to better support them? And I think we all have to take a look through our individual lenses to figure out how can we close some of these gaps and improve the situation for our city.
Very well said. You know, I saw Chris Kramer out here from Beyond Housing, and for half the time he was fidgeting. And I was with him, do you know what I'm saying? And then when they got down to the action part, I saw him really focused on that part. What he did with Beyond Housing, and I think what you said, it was really well said. What he did with Beyond Housing, there was an organization with capacity in a very narrow area. He said, what if we took that capacity and broadened it to one community? Normandy was the community, if I have this right, but we're going to hit every aspect of that. And what I loved about it is he then went out to people and said, hey, you know something about education? Because I want to bring somebody in, but we don't have that expertise. And he did it in a way that had that yin and the yang between we got to think this through, and second, let's get on and let's do some things. And I think there's more examples of those than we think. And I think, I do feel right now there's a new commitment that St. Louis has because of some of the things that happened a year and a half ago in one part of our region. It really brought out problems that cannot be put back in the box. But it's really not about North County or Ferguson exclusively. Do you know what I'm saying? It's about the region. And I think we're going to surprise ourselves about this. Now it's going to, who has showed the rocky ship there? Oh, I get that. I say every time you add a person to the partnership, add another headache, because it just is complex. And people think differently. But, you got to have that to get it done. So I think, I think there's a lot of hope, and I'm seeing funders. You're a great example, Emerson, well, so many, I don't want to mention anybody in particular, who are now sort of saying, we've got some expertise too. So maybe we're going to, on one hand, fund collaborations, and on the other hand, maybe we're going to make one together to see if we can do something.
And I also think integrating a system of recognition and acknowledgments that match the small wins. We do a really good job in big galas once a year, and we come together, but this work is hard. It requires a lot of people. So what are some of the acknowledgments that we can create that support those small table conversations and those recognition points that say, this was really good, and I'm proud of this effort, and putting that extra care, who cares for the caregivers? And so finding a way to integrate that into our system and our culture.
But one thing I do like, and the fact that we're here, we're talking to each other. I know that in Illinois, we brought groups together who had not talked to each other, who had not communicated, but yet you had a family where 5 or 6 agencies were going in there to talk to that family.
Right.
There are no more of those days. And I heard about a lot of great community building partnerships you guys talked about. Are there any more out there that you want to share, and tell us why it's working?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm really thinking about, because I'm looking right over here. And it seems to me there's a lot of young people right over there. And I guess what I want to say is this whole generational shift. So for us, and we've done a lot of work with what we call young professionals, diverse young professionals in town. There's now 3,000 people in the network. But it's been really fascinating for me to get their perspective. Some who've grown up here, some who haven't, came here for a job or came here for lots of other reasons, and to get their perspective. So I do think that one of the things I'm seeing is more by younger, I mean, whatever age young is, but high school, younger, people who are really invested now in St. Louis in a way, and invested in, hey, I think I've got an idea about way we can get things done. So I do think that the other part of this is making sure that we're bringing along those newer voices.
Anything else? Or any other programs that you know about, or collaborations? Because I think we've come a long way, but yet we still have a long way to go.
We do.
And that's why I'm so proud of East Side Align. Prior to that, we were not talking to each other. The school board was not talking to the city was not talking to doing the great job with the parents. We have a strike, everything. But now, this is why we need to come together. This is why those partnerships will work. So if you were to give one takeaway, what would you want the audience to know about and what you're doing and your partnerships? Just one takeaway from the panel.
I would have to say relationships matter. For any successful partnership or collaboration, you have to build strong relationships where you trust each other and you know that you can rely on the other party to help you reach your goal, and that you guys are going to support each other throughout the process. So do not hesitate to go across sectors as well. I mean, that's something that we've learned as St. Louis graduates. You want different perspectives at the table, and the more perspectives, the better. But then again, you have to have a small enough table to get things done.
What's your takeaway?
Well, I think that's very well said about relationships. I'm really struck by, so much of what makes partnerships and collaboration hard is the soft stuff. And it really requires us to have grit. It requires us, the things we want to cultivate in young people, we have to practice when we're operating in collaboration. And I want to share a phrase or a quote from a woman named Magda Peck, who I had the opportunity to talk with a couple years ago. And she talked about how hard this work is and that what it takes is an abundance of unwarranted optimism. And so we just have to stick, we need to stick with it. We need the grit to get through those rough seas and a confidence in our ability to do that. And it's, there's a lot of technical things we can learn along the way if we have that base of commitment to a common problem and we're committed to the relationship and to kind of sticking with it.
Have a
I would
takeaway?
definitely say for me it would be thank you. When I look at this room, it is beautiful. We have a great number of people here representing all different organizations and perspectives, and so just thank you for showing up.
Have a takeaway?
No, I love what you had to say. It was really quite good, to say the truth. No, I think we can do this. And I do feel a deep obligation to say to those who are here, who are teachers, or who are working in nonprofits, who are working with the homeless, who are doing all that, what I call really hard work, is to understand there's more people thinking about you than you may know, and that we really are all in this together. We have our different parts, our different things, aspects we can do. But I think at the end of the day, let's get on with business and let's just start doing it.
And let me thank all of you because you're doing so many wonderful things. And thank you for serving on the panel here today.
Thank you.
And this ends our panel discussion. And we're looking forward to
Very nice to meet you. Very well said. Grit. That's what Kip says. Grit.
Let's thank our speakers and our panel once again for some extraordinary energy. I love the energy here. You all have really helped us build our understanding, and Penny and Christina, thank you for laying the foundation. I think just a couple of quick things I would say as we prepare to adjourn to a reception. First of all, I thought it was kind of confronting and really telling when the statement was made, we spend an inordinate amount of time working on ourselves. And I think the call to action and the call to acting now and realizing that lofty aspirations are essential in order for us to push toward where we need to go. I've got two practical examples of this acting now. The Ferguson Commission is in the middle of a process, having delivered our report, of working on how does this work continue. And so this whole notion of having small groups coming together in a common, we call it a backbone or a core intermediary, was exactly relevant to the slide that was on the screen, because we've all been in those orange boxes, right? And we love our orange box. We're very proud of our orange box. But if we don't come out of that and find a way in which we can move out of those silos to these multi-sector groups that you helped us understand, Christina. So that's a practical example of something's going on right now to try to build that process toward action. The second one is more relevant. There was a little bit of a commotion in the back, and so when you put that slide up about the course titles in the juvenile facilities in the high school, I think the people that work on those course titles, they left immediately to go change those course titles right here today so they could act now and get that small win that you were helping us understand. And finally, this notion that we have to seek equity in the way in which we connect people. I think the clarion call for our region at this point in our time, in our history, in the moment to which we have been called, is to realize that equity and justice for all, and realizing that opportunity needs to extend to all of St. Louis and not just part of us. And that justice for all is a real clarion call that we need to pay careful attention to, and that equity and the equity lens should be applied to everything we do in such a way so that we know that our actions do in fact achieve the results that we all desire, and that we do have this opportunity to walk now hand in hand. Even if we don't quite see eye to eye, we realize that we can join together to find common ground. We're going to invite you to join in that effort. Now, as we adjourn, we're going to go to the Center for Public Engagement, which is upstairs. The Wyman teens that exited just a minute ago are going to be there to guide you. And we're going to take 2 specific steps. This is not just your normal reception, although there will be wine and cheese and all the things you expect in the reception. But there will be an opportunity about 20 minutes in just to take 2 specific steps. We'll introduce them by video, so don't miss the reception. It's going to be easy and very informative. So please join us. Again, we thank the Saigh Foundation and the 9 Network and the Wyman Center for their extraordinary work in bringing us all together to find ways in which we can, in fact, make our region a fairer, safer place. Thank you all. Have a great evening.